The studio lights were warm, the laughter was light, and the cameras had just finished their third sweep across the stage. It was supposed to be an easy night, a nostalgic one. Bill Maher leaned into his desk with the relaxed confidence of a man who had done this hundreds of times. Across from him sat Harrison Ford, iconic as ever, calm, reserved, not smiling too much, but never cold. The audience had been waiting all night to hear stories about Indiana Jones. Maybe something funny about his pilot's license and a few smart lines about the environment. That was the setup, but something changed. It started when Maher shifted. In his chair, looked at the audience with that smirk he always wore before saying something he knew would bite, and said, "So Harrison, you fly more jets than Greta Thunberg takes selfies. You still calling yourself Captain Planet these days?" The audience reacted the way Maher trained them. Some laughed, others gasped, but it was a moment meant to entertain. Except Harrison Ford didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. His expression didn't change, but his body did. He leaned forward slowly, his hands pressed together like a man about to say something he had held back for far too long. "You don't get to sit on your throne of sarcasm and mock people trying to fix a world you profit from breaking," he said quietly. The audience went still. Maher blinked, leaned back in his chair, and tried to recover. "Come on, Harrison," he chuckled. "We both know Hollywood hypocrisy when we see it." Ford's voice didn't rise, but his tone grew harder. "You're not calling out hypocrisy. You're hiding behind it. There's a difference between failing while trying to help and succeeding by doing nothing." The tension in the room thickened. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably. Others stared ahead, caught between the joke and the truth. Maher tried again. "Oh, come on, man. This isn't CNN, it's a comedy show. Do you know that?" Ford's reply was sharp. "Then maybe stop pretending what you say doesn't shape people." He reached down, unpinned his mic, and gently set it on the table. The sound of it landing was louder than any applause. "I didn't come here to be ridiculed," he said, standing up. "I came here to speak for something that actually matters." The crew scrambled. The producers froze. Maher opened his mouth to say something else, but nothing came out. Harrison Ford was already walking off the stage. The silence was crushing. The audience didn't know whether to clap, boo, or sit in stunned silence. Maher blinked again, then forced out a weak laugh, muttering something about Hollywood drama and sensitive movie stars. But no one was listening anymore. Within minutes, the footage hit the internet. Clips of Ford's words, "You're not calling out hypocrisy. You're hiding behind it," spread across platforms like wildfire. Twitter trended #FordWalksOut. Instagram had reels dissecting every second. TikTok was flooded with split-screen reactions. Many users calling it the moment someone finally stood up to Bill Maher without screaming. People weren't just watching a walkout. They were watching a cultural shift. Backstage, Ford didn't say much. His publicist tried to hand him a phone, press already calling, but he waved it away. He had said what he came to say. The cameras just happened to be rolling. That night, Maher's team cut the interview short in post-production. But by then, it was already too late. The truth was out. And for the first time in years, the most powerful voice in the room didn't belong to the host. It belonged to the man who had walked away. The video of Harrison Ford walking off real-time with Bill Maher reached 5 million views before sunrise. By mid-morning, it had crossed 20. Newsrooms scrambled to keep up. Social media was a wildfire. Ford's words were quoted on protest signs, headlines, and memes. "You're not calling out hypocrisy. You're hiding behind it." That one sentence, measured, unshaken, had become more than just a reply. It had become a challenge. On CNN, analysts debated whether the moment marked a shift in how celebrities handled media attacks. On Fox News, hosts dismissed it as Hollywood fragility. But even they couldn't ignore the numbers. Viewership spiked across every platform that replayed the clip. And the audience wasn't split by left or right. It was split by tone. Some people were tired of jokes about a burning world. Others were tired of being told to care by those with private jets. But what united them all was the silence that followed Maher's punchline. The moment Ford didn't play along in loss. Angelus, outside a climate activism conference, students held up signs reading #truth over sarcasm. Inside, organizers rewrote their opening remarks to include Ford's quote. A small speech scheduled by a lesser-known scientist suddenly drew national media attention because she mentioned Ford in her keynote. He didn't walk off in anger, she said. Kay walked out of a trap, and that difference matters. Meanwhile, Harrison Ford remained out of sight. No statements, no clarifications. It's just one short message released through his foundation. I'm not interested in performances. We're out of time for that. Either say something real or say nothing at all. Oh, words spread faster than the video itself. Activists quoted it in digital campaigns. Environmental NGOs shared it with donors. High school students turned it into debate themes. Even late-night hosts, who usually followed Maher's style, started pulling back, reassessing their tone. Colbert paused his monologue to say, maybe, we've all been too clever for too long. Maher, however, wasn't done. The following Friday, he addressed the incident during his monologue. Well, folks, he began, laughing awkwardly, turns out you can't make a joke anymore without someone turning it into a revolution. The audience chuckled, but it sounded different now, less laughter, more discomfort. He continued, doubling down, framing Ford as someone who couldn't take a joke and didn't understand the show's format. It's comedy, Maher said. Not confession, but the damage was already done. Public reaction to the episode was cold. Viewership dipped. Sponsors quietly paused ad slots. One environmental foundation pulled out entirely. A statement from their spokesperson read, "There's nothing funny about people who try to discredit climate action for laughs." Inside Maher's team, things grew tense. Emails leaked. One producer was quoted saying, "We misread the room. We thought Harrison would spar, not walk." Another admitted they had pre-cleared a set of sarcastic jabs with Maher, designed to provoke a viral moment. But the clip had gone viral for the wrong reason. Meanwhile, international media picked it up. The BBC aired a panel titled Climate, Comedy, and Consequence. In France, Le Monde ran a front-page column praising Ford's restraint. In Brazil, environmentalists used Ford's quote during a protest outside a logging company's headquarters. And still, Ford said nothing more. His silence became a statement in itself. Every day he refused to engage, the story grew louder. It wasn't about a man walking off a stage anymore. It was about the line between truth and performance, between commentary and consequence. On Twitter, a teenager posted a clip of Ford's walk out with the caption, "When a whisper is louder than a scream." It was retweeted over 200,000 times in a single day. Reporters outside his home waited for a comment. Paparazzi tried to capture him in public, but he avoided every lens. That restraint so rare, so deliberate, only deepened the weight of what had happened. And Bill Maher, he kept talking, but fewer people were listening, because Harrison Ford had already said enough, and now the world was repeating him. By the third day, Harrison Ford's words had traveled far beyond Hollywood. In Geneva, the UN Climate Council opened their summit with a montage of global climate voices, and at the end, Ford's line appeared on the main screen in bold white font. Either say something real or say nothing at all. The delegates didn't applaud. They stood. Something had shifted. Back in the United States, the effects were everywhere. On college campuses, professors used the interview as a case study in political discourse. Environmental groups rewrote their mission statements to echo Ford's phrasing. Journalists began to re-examine the tone of entertainment news, how satire had become deflection, how just a joke had turned into a shield against accountability. But it wasn't just cultural, it was political. Senator Melina Ray of Oregon, long a quiet voice in environmental reform, took to the Senate floor and quoted Ford directly. We've had too many panels. Too many panels, too many promises, and not enough action. As someone recently reminded the country, we are out of time for performances. Her speech, streamed live, immediately went viral. Viewers noted that she wasn't using Ford as a celebrity soundbite. She was using his refusal as a model for leadership. Meanwhile, Bill Maher's world had begun to contract. More emails leaked this time showing that producers had flagged Ford as too serious during pre-show planning. Internal notes read, "Keep it playful. Push him a bit audiences. Love it when he stiffens." The intent was clear. Maher's show had hoped to provoke Ford into a moment of tension. They just didn't expect him to exit with dignity instead of drama. Public opinion started turning hard in an unexpected move. One of Maher's own former guests, a former Republican governor, publicly withdrew from an upcoming appearance, stating, "I'm not interested in being used as a prop for entertainment dressed as politics." Another guest, a prominent climate scientist, posted on social media, "This isn't about Ford. This is about a man trying to speak seriously and being laughed at for it." Maher stayed defiant on air, continuing his pattern of sarcasm. But the laughter from his audience had changed. It was quieter, uncertain. Viewers began noticing that guests were less comfortable, pausing before answering, calculating their words more carefully. The studio felt colder, and Harrison Ford, he finally appeared again, briefly, quietly. And not where anyone expected. He was seen attending a community event in Oakland, California. No cameras, no stage, just him, a folding chair, and a room full of teenagers discussing water justice and environmental education. A local organizer posted a photo, Ford speaking to a group of high schoolers, listening more than talking. No press statement followed, just a caption, "He told us, you don't have to be loud to be clear." The image spread instantly. The same day, Ford's foundation released a new campaign focused on youth-led climate solutions. The slogan, #SaySomethingReal. The campaign wasn't glossy, wasn't celebrity-packed. It featured students, indigenous leaders, small-town organizers, and climate workers on the front lines. Their voices echoed the core message, "Stop laughing about the fire when people are already burning." International media began referring to the incident as the Marford line, a cultural turning point where climate activism clashed with entertainment cynicism. Some compared it to the moment when public figures stopped treating political platforms like late-night stages. Others framed it as a generational confrontation, performance versus purpose. But no matter how they described it, everyone agreed on one thing: Bill Maher had lost control of the narrative, and Harrison Ford had never tried to control it at all. He'd simply spoken, then walked away. And in that silence, he had forced the world to finally listen. For days after the walkout, the fallout was no longer just media noise. It had grown into something measurable. Once a cornerstone of political comedy, reported its lowest viewership in 2 years. Multiple advertisers paused contracts. One streaming service removed the latest episode entirely, citing editorial reassessment. Internally, HBO executives were nervous. Not because Ford had walked off. That kind of scandal usually faded. But because this one wasn't fading, it was spreading. Newspapers across Europe ran editorials not about celebrity behavior, but about tone. Le Figaro called it a moment of necessary moral correction. Der Spiegel titled its piece, "Laughing While the World Burns." In South Africa, a panel of youth activists praised Ford's restraint, saying he didn't perform. He protested. And in Delhi, a university climate forum opened with students discussing the danger of sarcasm in Cressissa, direct reference to Maher's smirk. And Ford's walkout. Inside Maher's writer's room, tension was thick. Writers debated whether to apologize, double down, or shift tone completely. Some pushed to invite Ford back. Others wanted to release behind-the-scenes footage. But the damage was cultural now, not just reputational. That same morning, A media watchdog group published a detailed analysis of Maher's climate-related segments over the past 5 years. The findings weren't flattering. The report showed a consistent pattern, dismissive language, condescending humor, and platforming skeptics with little rebuttal. The group stopped short of calling it denial. But it did call it dangerous. Then came the whistleblower, a former producer from Maher's staff. Anonymously shared internal memos with a respected political reporter. The memos revealed that Maher had planned the Greta joke in advance. The goal wasn't genuine satire, it was disruption. Viral spike. A confrontation that would trend. Harrison Ford wasn't the target, he was the device. The report detailed how showrunners had discussed poking the bear and even joked, "That Ford wouldn't walk, he's too old to storm out." The story broke within the hour. That line, "too old to storm out," hit harder than any punchline. Social media lit up in Ford's defense. Celebrities who had stayed quiet began to speak. Mark Ruffalo tweeted, "There's a difference between old and wise. Harrison proved that." Rosario Dawson posted, "You can't bait people who come. Armed with truth, you just end up exposed." Meanwhile, environmental groups took action. Dozens of organizations signed an open letter calling for late-night hosts to commit to respectful climate dialogue, urging networks to stop treating global crisis as comedy filler. The letter ended with Ford's now famous line, "We're out of time for performances." And then the White House weighed in. During a press briefing, a reporter asked the president's press secretary if Ford's statement had influenced the administration's new messaging on climate urgency. The answer was carefully worded, but unmistakable. "We believe it's important for all platforms, entertainment and political, to take this moment seriously. The public deserves honesty, not distraction." Maher stayed quiet for 2 days. Then, on his next broadcast, he tried to clean it up. He opened the show with a forced smile and a line that didn't land. "Turns out the force wasn't with me last week." Few chuckles followed, but the tone had changed. Even his laughter felt hollow. He tried to explain that comedy was about discomfort, that his job was to push buttons. But when he got to Ford, he stumbled. "I respect Harrison, truly. But I also think we can't let seriousness silence satire." The audience didn't boo. They didn't cheer either. They just watched because Harrison Ford hadn't silenced satire. He'd exposed the line where jokes became armor for inaction, where comedy became cover. And outside the studio, in places Maher rarely reached, schools, rural communities, activist spaces, people weren't talking about his show anymore. They were talking about Ford's quiet defiance, about what it meant to not play along, about what it meant to walk out, not in anger, but in purpose. In a small mountain town in Colorado, a middle school debate team gathered for their weekly meeting. The topic that week was media and accountability. One student stood up, wearing a thrifted leather jacket that looked suspiciously like it belonged to Indiana Jones, and said, "Sometimes the biggest thing you can do is just stand up and leave the lie behind." And nobody laughed, because this time the truth had stayed in the room. A week after Harrison Ford's speech in Geneva, the world had not moved on. Not because it couldn't, but because something in it had been made still. The noise of politics, entertainment, and outrage didn't stop, but it paused just slightly, like a collective inhale that hadn't yet been exhaled. Ford's words had planted themselves deep, not in headlines, but in minds, not in the noise, but in the quiet afterward, in Washington. The Senate Committee on Environmental Oversight opened its session not with a flag salute, but with a reading of a quote from Ford's speech. "Distraction sold as dialogue is surrender." Dressed in satire, the chamber, normally rowdy, sat in respectful silence. One senator called the address the first honest moment in years. Schools across the country began assigning the clip of Ford's speech alongside traditional readings on environmental science. Students wrote essays not about Hollywood or politics, but about tone, conviction. and the difference between speaking and performing. Backstage at media networks, producers were reevaluating. Writers' rooms that once saw climate as a punchline now held editorial meetings about tone. Several comedians admitted on podcasts they were rethinking how they discussed global issues because the audience had changed. People didn't want more sarcasm. They wanted sincerity. And at HBO, the reckoning arrived. Bill Maher was summoned for a private meeting with network executives. The walkout, the fallout, the ratings, the canceled guests, it all added up. Sponsors were dropping faster than spin. Could control? Focus group results showed that Maher's usual audience didn't find him daring anymore. They found him defensive, detached, out of step with a moment that demanded more than clever comebacks. The next morning, HBO released a short statement. After careful consideration, Real Time will take an extended production hiatus. We thank our viewers for years of thoughtful engagement. No one said it was canceled, but everyone knew what it meant. Maher didn't respond publicly. He posted a single sentence on social media. You win some, you lose some. But at least, I was never boring. Was meant to be flippant, but it sounded hollow. Meanwhile, Ford remained out of the spotlight. He declined interviews from every major network. He refused magazine features and streaming offers. The speech had been enough. He hadn't acted. He hadn't campaigned. He had just told the truth and left on a cafe in Nairobi too young. Climate organizers streamed his speech again, writing down the line that struck them most. In a high school in Michigan, a student ended her senior thesis with his final words: say something real or say nothing at all. And in a newsroom in London, a veteran journalist looked at her intern and said, we used to think walking off was weakness. But that man, he walked out and we all followed. It was never about Ford's fame. Not really. It was about the choice he made not to perform when the world expected performance. He didn't slam the table. He didn't shout. He didn't sell his silence. He simply refused to play the part. And that refusal broke the script. A documentary began production. Weeks later, not about Ford, but about the moment. About what it said when one of the world's most recognizable men stopped playing along and asked us to do the same. And in one of the final scenes of that documentary, a young activist stares into the camera and says, we don't need more heroes. We need people who are brave enough to stop pretending. Then she pauses, smiles slightly, and adds, like he did. The screen fades to black dot, and for the first time in a long time, it doesn't need to say anything more. The fifth day felt different. The internet wasn't shouting anymore, it was reflecting. Think pieces, op-eds, and editorials moved past the drama and started to examine the deeper current beneath Harrison Ford's walkout. What began as a viral moment had turned into a rare thing: cultural introspection. Major outlets ran long-form features not on Ford's career or Maher's sarcasm, but on the role of media in shaping climate urgency. The Atlantic published an essay titled Silence as Rebellion: When Walking Out Speaks Louder Than Any Debate. The Guardian asked whether satire was still a useful tool in a world already on fire. On NPR, a professor of environmental ethics said simply, what Ford did wasn't emotional. It was moral. But not everyone was introspective. Bill Maher returned to air again, this time with a hand-picked panel of loyalists. He opened the episode by claiming the controversy was proof people had lost their sense of humor. He then pivoted, calling Ford's response overblown, Hollywood vanity in a green wrapper. And another celebrity moment pretending to be a movement. But there were no cheers, no claps. It's just a few awkward chuckles from the audience, unsure whether to follow the cue or sit in silence. One of the guests tried to diffuse it with a joke, but it died mid-sentence. The energy had shifted. The audience didn't want to mock Harrison Ford. They wanted to understand why it all felt so serious now, and they weren't alone in Washington. A closed-door meeting of environmental advisors to the president included a new item on the agenda: media responsibility. In public climate messaging, a senior advisor referenced the Marford clash directly. Notes from the meeting leaked to the press hours later. One line stood out. This wasn't about offense. This was about whether we're still listening to the wrong people. By now, the pressure had spread to HBO. Behind the scenes, executives held emergency meetings about the future of Maher's show. Not because of ratings, those could bounce back, because public trust was eroding. Sponsors were asking hard questions. Several climate-forward brands had paused advertising indefinitely. A leaked memo from network leadership read, "We cannot afford to be the platform that mocks urgency while the planet burns." Meanwhile, Harrison Ford still hadn't returned to television, but his presence was felt everywhere. A coalition of international youth leaders launched a new initiative named Real Responsibility. Equity, Action, Leadership Band credited Ford's moment as the spark. They used his face on posters. His quote became the tagline, "Say something real or say nothing at all." The group received more than 100,000 new signups in the first 24 hours. At the same time, the UN Climate Council confirmed that Harrison Ford had accepted their invitation to speak at the Geneva summit. It would be his first public appearance since the interview. Media outlets across the globe prepared to live stream it. The room would not be filled with cameras, but with climate scientists, heads of state, and youth delegates from over 50 countries. And still, Ford remained quiet until the night before the summit, when his foundation released a 60-second video black background. His face in dim light, no music, no edits. He looked directly into the camera. "When I walked out of that studio," he said, "I wasn't angry. I was finished. Finished pretending this is all a game. Finished watching sarcasm strangle urgency. We keep laughing at the fire, eventually it burns everything." He paused, then added, "You don't need to follow me. You just need to stop pretending it's funny." Then the screen cut to black. That single minute broke the internet. Celebrities reposted it. Scientists shared it. Activists declared it the most honest 60 seconds aired this year. Even critics admitted this. Wasn't branding. It wasn't marketing. It was conviction. And Bill Maher, he didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say that didn't sound like noise in Geneva. The air was crisp and the halls quiet, but every delegate knew something different was coming. The United Nations Climate Summit had seen many speeches before, passionate, tearful, polished, but today felt charged. Not because of the cameras, but because of the silence that had built around one man's refusal to keep performing. Harrison Ford arrived without ceremony. No entourage, no designer suit. Just a black jacket, a folder under his arm, and a face that looked exactly the way the world felt, weathered, focused, and done with pretending. The summit room was filled with policymakers, scientists, youth, activists, and a row of international press. No music played as he walked to the podium. No announcer read his name. Just footsteps echoing across the marble floor, followed by a hush that stretched so long it felt like a held breath. He didn't speak right away. He opened the folder, adjusted the mic, then looked around the room. His voice, when it came, was low, not theatrical, not angry. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to be clear. I'm not here to entertain. I'm here because someone somewhere needs to stop waiting for applause before they tell the truth." The room remained still. Ford spoke not as a movie star, but as a man who had traveled the world and seen its damage up close. Talked about villages drowning, forests erased, rivers that no longer ran. He spoke of how easy it is to make jokes, about things you've never had to lose, and how dangerous it is when that becomes the only voice people hear. He never mentioned Bill Maher, not once. But he didn't have to. Climate collapse is not a concept, he said. It's a pattern, and patterns become futures. If we keep selling distraction as dialogue, then we've already surrendered. He paused, eyes scanning the delegates. I walked off a set last week not because I was insulted, but because I realized I was being asked to play a part in something that wasn't real. A conversation designed to look like it mattered, but never meant to lead to change. There was no rage in his voice. Just wait. Truth laid bare with nothing extra. He spoke for 9 minutes. By the end, the room stood. Not all at once, not in coordinated applause, but slowly, silently, like people standing for something they believed in but had never seen said. Out loud by someone with that kind of reach. The moment was streamed in 42 languages. Within an hour, clips circulated across social media. But unlike the walkout, this time the story wasn't Harrison Ford shocks TV host. It was Harrison Ford reframes the global climate conversation. News anchors dropped their planned segments to replay parts of the speech. Commentators were unusually quiet. Instead of reacting, they listened. Back in the U.S., the White House issued a statement praising Ford's speech as clear-eyed and courageous. The president tweeted, "Truth like that doesn't come from headlines. It comes from having nothing to prove." Several members of Congress echoed the sentiment, calling for new hearings on environmental media responsibility. At HBO, the impact was immediate. The network's executive board met behind closed doors to discuss the long-term future of Mars. One leaked note read, "We've lost the moral room. And it may not come back." Guests began canceling again. A few scheduled panelists asked to be reassigned or delayed. Meanwhile, Ford declined all post-speech interviews. He left Geneva the same way he arrived, quietly, without fuss, flying economy under a different name. A Swiss reporter asked him, as he boarded, why he wouldn't stay for press events. His answer was simple: "I already said what I had to. Anything after that would just be performance." The response was picked up by wire services around the globe. In classrooms, debate. Clubs and activist circles, that moment replaced the walkout as the real climax. The idea that walking away was the beginning, speaking honestly, deliberately, and just once was the real act of power. Harrison Ford hadn't started a movement. He'd held up a mirror. And the world, for once, didn't look away.